When you realize that survival requires you to serve the very people you were trained to stand beside. The humiliation cuts deeper for having once believed you were equals. That's how Odessa's story begins. The day the hospital called with the final bill was the day her carefully constructed life proved to be as fragile as spider silk. She'd clung to the belief that hard work and education were shields against catastrophe, that her business degree and impeccable references would always keep her family safe. She'd believed the promise that merit mattered more than money, that competence could overcome crisis. But hope was a currency that bought nothing when creditors came calling, as it turned out, because when it's finally exhausted, you suffer not just the shame of your poverty, but the crushing weight of having believed the world was fair at all. The security officer's dark eyes were cold in the harsh LED light of the penthouse elevator, his massive frame blocking any view of the ascending floors. Odessa stood rigid in her new uniform, a crisp black dress that felt more like a costume than clothing, as the woman beside her delivered instructions in clipped, urgent whispers. "Don't look him in the eye," the older maid, Mrs. Chen, hissed, her weathered hands gripping Odessa's wrist with surprising strength. "And don't ask him anything personal. CEO Evander doesn't appreciate curiosity." The elevator climbed higher, each floor a countdown to something Odessa couldn't quite name. Dread, perhaps. Or surrender. "Whatever you do," Mrs. Chen continued, her voice dropping even lower, "don't pity him. He's a billionaire alpha, not a charity case. Pity is weakness to him." Odessa's stomach twisted. Like everyone in the city's corporate world, human and shifter alike, she'd heard the rumors about Evander Thorne. The ruthless CEO who'd built an empire before 30. The alpha whose business rivals either bent the knee or disappeared from the industry entirely. Stories circulated through LinkedIn and whispered breakroom conversations about his legendary cruelty, how even other alphas feared challenging him in boardrooms. At least those born into wealth had connections to cushion their falls. People like Odessa, educated but broke, capable but desperate, were interchangeable. Another resumed to be reviewed and discarded. Another bright mind reduced to scrubbing floors. And Odessa, she was considered even worse than simply poor. She'd had potential once, graduating summa cum laude with a business degree, only to watch her mother's cancer devour every opportunity along with their savings. She was her family's burden twice over, first for the crushing medical debt that bore her name on every collection notice, then for the pride she'd had to swallow to take a maid position after years of corporate interviews that led nowhere. The financial aid office had whispered that her bad credit ran deeper than anyone could fix. No loans, no mercy, no options. "Miss Odessa," Mrs. Chen's voice cracked with something that sounded like genuine concern, "we've all needed this job at some point. If you can last the probationary month, the pay is enough to—" "I know the pay," Odessa said quietly, her fingers curling into fists against her plain black skirt. She'd memorized every number on the contract. 50,000 a month. Enough to make the minimum payments to keep her sister in school, to buy her mother another round of treatment. Enough to sell her dignity for. The elevator doors whispered open. "He requires new staff regularly," Mrs. Chen said, and Odessa caught the unspoken warning in those words. "People don't last long here. Mr. Thorne is particular. This one will do whatever it takes to survive." Odessa's body tensed. She'd promised her mother she would. She'd sworn to her younger sister that everything would be fine, that her education hadn't been wasted, that taking a maid's position was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. But as she stepped into the vast, temperature-controlled penthouse with its wall of windows overlooking the glittering city below, as her eyes adjusted to the sleek minimalism of a space that cost more per square foot than her family's entire house, she felt the last remnants of that promise crumble. Because there, behind an enormous desk of black marble and steel, sat the most terrifying man she'd ever seen. Alpha Evander Thorne. Platinum blonde hair pulled back severely, amber eyes that could freeze blood, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car. His presence dominated the room with the kind of casual, crushing power that came from never having been told no. And he was confined to a high-tech wheelchair, his powerful frame motionless below the waist, his elegant hands resting on custom armrests inlaid with what looked like actual gold. The juxtaposition was jarring, obscene even. This apex predator of a man, this alpha who commanded billions with a signature, rendered vulnerable by whatever injury or illness had stolen his mobility. The wheelchair was beautiful, clearly custom designed, all black chrome and whisper-quiet mechanisms, but it was still a cage. Mrs. Chen bowed slightly. "Mr. Thorne, this is Odessa Laurent, your new." "I can read a resume, Mrs. Chen." His voice was exactly what Odessa had expected. Cold, precise, and sharp enough to draw blood. He didn't look at Odessa. His attention fixed on a tablet screen. Business degree from state. Graduated with honors. 3 years of corporate applications. 0 offers. The casual cruelty of that summary stole Odessa's breath. "Tell me, Miss Laurent," he continued, still not looking up, "did you apply here hoping I'd recognize your obvious intelligence and promote you? Or are you simply that desperate?" The room was silent except for the faint hum of climate control. Mrs. Chen had gone pale. Odessa's pride, that useless, expensive thing she'd carried through 4 years of university and 100 rejection letters, flared hot in her chest. She should lower her eyes. She should murmur an apology. She should do whatever it took to keep this job. Instead, she met his gaze when he finally looked up. "Both," she said clearly. Something flickered in those amber eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or interest. It was gone before she could name it. "You're honest," he said almost thoughtfully. "That's either refreshing or incredibly stupid." He gestured sharply toward the door. "Mrs. Chen, you're dismissed. Miss Laurent can find her own way to the service quarters if I decide she's worth keeping." "Sir, the orientation." "Dismissed." Mrs. Chen fled, leaving Odessa alone with the billionaire in his golden cage. Evander leaned back in his wheelchair, studying her with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "You have one chance to walk out of here with your dignity intact, Miss Laurent. I suggest you take it. I'm told I'm impossible to work for." "You're told correctly, I'm sure," Odessa replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I don't have the luxury of dignity, Mr. Thorne. I have hospital bills that won't wait for me to find something more suitable to my education." How brutally honest. His lips curved into something too cold to be called a smile. "And how do I know you won't steal from me? Sell information to my competitors. Use your access to this penthouse for your own advantage." "You don't," Odessa said simply. "Just as I don't know if you'll actually pay me what the contract promises, or if this is some elaborate game wealthy men play with desperate women." She straightened her spine. "But I'm here anyway because my mother needs treatment I can't afford, and my sister needs to finish school. So if you're going to fire me, do it now, Mr. Thorne. I'll need time to find something else before the next payment is due." The silence stretched between them like a blade. Then Evander Thorne laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "You have nerve. I'll grant you that." He pressed something on his wheelchair's armrest, and a panel in the wall slid open, revealing a private office beyond. "Your first task is to organize my study. Everything in that room is monitored by security cameras. Touch anything you shouldn't, and you'll be arrested before you reach the lobby." "Understood." "Perfectly. Then get to work, Miss Laurent. Let's see if your competence matches your audacity." As Odessa walked toward the study, she felt his eyes tracking her every movement. She didn't look back, didn't let him see the way her hands trembled slightly as she crossed the threshold into his private domain. The study was immaculate and intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a second desk with multiple monitors, papers arranged in precise stacks, and a faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with old leather. And despite the wheelchair, despite his supposed paralysis, some of the objects in the room were arranged on high shelves, far beyond the reach of a seated man. Odessa's analytical mind, the one that had earned her those useless honors, catalogued the inconsistency automatically. But she said nothing, simply picked up a feather duster from the cleaning caddy, and began to work. Behind her, through the open doorway, She could feel Evander Thorne watching her with the patience of a predator who had all the time in the world. She'd been hired to clean his penthouse. But Odessa was beginning to suspect she was actually here to be tested. And unlike every other opportunity she'd failed to seize, this was one test she couldn't afford to fail. 3 days into her employment, Odessa discovered that Evander Thorne was either the most careless billionaire in corporate America, or the most calculating. She'd arrived at dawn as instructed, let herself into the penthouse with a keycard that felt like a leash around her neck, and found the study in controlled chaos. Financial documents scattered across the desk. Merger proposals marked with angry red ink. A tablet left open to an email chain discussing quarterly projections that would make any competitor salivate. And Evander nowhere to be seen. The security cameras in the corners blinked their steady red eyes at her, recording everything. Odessa stood frozen in the doorway, her cleaning supplies feeling absurdly inadequate for what lay before her. This was a test. Had to be. Leave the documents alone and prove she knew her place, or touch them and give him an excuse to call the police. But as she moved closer, drawn by a habit she couldn't quite suppress, she saw the problem. The merger proposals were misfiled with last quarter's earnings reports. The correspondence was sorted by sender rather than subject, making it impossible to follow any single negotiation thread. For someone as precise as Evander clearly was, this disorganization would be maddening. Her fingers itched. 4 years of business school and an anal retentive personality didn't simply vanish because she was holding a feather duster instead of a stylus. I'm either about to save my job or lose it, she muttered to the empty room and began to work. 20 minutes later she'd created a system. Merger documents chronologically arranged and cross-referenced by company name, financial reports sorted by division and date, correspondence grouped by project with the most recent on top. She used sticky notes from his desk drawer to label each stack, color-coded for priority based on the patterns she'd observed in his markup. She was labeling the final stack when his voice cut through her concentration like a knife. What exactly do you think you're doing? Odessa's heart lurched. Evander sat in the doorway, his wheelchair silent on the plush carpet, his expression absolutely unreadable. She had no idea how long he'd been watching. Organizing, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The files were confidential, he interrupted, moving closer with that eerie mechanical smoothness. Sensitive corporate information that could destroy this company in the wrong hands. They were a mess, Odessa countered, then immediately regretted her tone. She was a maid. Maids didn't critique their employers' organizational systems. I apologize, Mr. Thorne. Overstep. I'll put everything back exactly as. Don't. He was beside the desk now, those amber eyes scanning her work with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His hand reached out, elegant fingers tracing the edges of her color-coded system. The silence stretched so long Odessa wondered if she should simply leave, pack her few belongings from the servants' quarters, and save them both the drama of a firing. Then he picked up his tablet and began scrolling. The Meridian merger, he said abruptly. Where did you put the correspondence with their legal team? Odessa pointed to the green-labeled stack. Chronological, most recent on top. The contract revisions are underneath, cross-referenced with the financial impact assessments you'd marked as priority. He pulled the stack toward him, reviewed the top 3 documents, and something that might have been approval flickered across his face. The Kensington acquisition. Blue stack. You'd noted concerns about their Asian subsidiaries, so I pulled those reports separately. And you deduced this how? Your marginal notes. You write verify next to information you distrust and leverage next to weaknesses you intend to exploit. It's consistent across all your documents. The words were out before she could stop them, before she could remember that noticing such things, understanding such things, revealed far too much about how carefully she'd been paying attention. About how her supposedly wasted education had taught her to read between the lines of corporate warfare. Evander was staring at her now with an expression she couldn't name. Not anger. Something more dangerous. You have a business degree, he said slowly. You already knew that. It was on my resume. I knew you had the paperwork. I didn't know you had the instinct. He touched something on his wheelchair's armrest, and she heard the study door click shut behind them. Her pulse spiked. How would you respond to Meridian's latest counteroffer? What? You've read the correspondence. You understand the leverage points. How would you respond? This was insane. He was testing her, obviously, but the look in his eyes suggested he actually wanted an answer. Odessa's mind raced through what she'd seen in those documents. Meridian wants approval rights over executive appointments. They're scared you'll gut their management. Correct. And reject it. You're acquiring their infrastructure and client base, not their organizational bloat. Offer them enhanced severance packages instead. Looks compassionate publicly, costs less long-term, and you maintain operational control. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. Then Evander smiled, a real smile this time, sharp and genuinely pleased. Mrs. Chen, he called out, his voice carrying through the penthouse. Cancel my 9 o'clock. Miss Laurent will be taking dictation this morning. Sir. Mrs. Chen's confused voice floated back. You heard me. He pulled a second tablet from a drawer and handed it to Odessa. You can type faster than you can clean, I presume? Yes, but... Then sit. I have 17 emails to send before the Tokyo markets close, and my usual assistant is out with the flu. Unless you'd prefer to dust the bookshelves. Odessa sat, the expensive desk chair feeling like a throne after 3 days of kneeling on floors. For the next 2 hours, she transcribed Evander's cold, precise responses to merger inquiries, acquisition threats, and one particularly vicious rejection letter to a hedge fund that had attempted a hostile takeover. His language was surgical, every word chosen for maximum impact, every sentence a calculated strike. And he was brilliant at it. Ruthless, yes, but brilliant. You disagree with something, he said without looking up from his own screen. Your typing paused. Odessa hesitated. The response to Blackstone Investments. You're threatening litigation. They violated the non-disclosure agreement. They violated the spirit of it. The actual language has a loophole regarding third-party consultants. If you sue, their lawyers will bury you in discovery for 18 months and cost you the entire European expansion timeline. Evander's fingers stilled on his keyboard. And you would suggest, renegotiate, acknowledge the loophole, compliment their legal team's thoroughness, and offer an amended NDA with tighter language in exchange for a minor concession on their end. You look magnanimous, they avoid litigation costs, and you get the protection you actually need. That's remarkably Machiavellian for a maid. I'm remarkably overqualified for a maid, Odessa shot back, then immediately regretted it. But Evander laughed, that same sharp, humorless sound from their first meeting, except this time there was something almost genuine underneath. Delete the last paragraph, he instructed. Replace it with your version. And Miss Laurent, next time I leave documents out, organize them exactly like this. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt exposed, like he'd just discovered a weakness he could exploit. The rest of the day passed in a strange new rhythm. She cleaned when he was in meetings, took dictation when he needed it, and tried not to notice how he watched her with that calculating intensity whenever he thought she wasn't looking. That night, after Mrs. Chan had left and the penthouse had fallen into the particular silence of expensive spaces, Odessa was finishing the kitchen when she heard voices from the study. Male voices, low and urgent. She should have gone to her quarters. She should have put in earbuds and pretended she heard nothing. Instead, she crept closer to the half-open door. Can't keep this up forever, an unfamiliar voice was saying. Deeper than Evander's, rough-edged. You've been in that chair for 6 months. The board is getting restless. The board can remain restless until I'm certain which one of them tried to kill me. Odessa's breath caught. Tried to kill him. Victor's dead, Ev. The threat died with him. Victor was a puppet. Someone gave him the access codes, the financial leverage, the exact timing of my schedule. Someone on my board helped him, and they're still there, waiting for another opportunity. There was a sound of movement, something that made Odessa's analytical mind stutter to a halt. Because through the gap in the door, she saw Evander Thorne stand up from his wheelchair with the fluid grace of an apex predator. His full height imposing. His body moving with the coiled strength of someone who'd never been injured at all. "Griffin, I'm close. The new security protocols I implemented after the accident are showing patterns. Someone's been accessing files they shouldn't, covering their tracks, but not perfectly. Another few weeks and I'll have proof." The man called Griffin, broad-shouldered, scarred, with the bearing of someone military-trained, shook his head. "And what about her?" "Her. The new maid. You're getting comfortable. Letting her handle sensitive material. What if she's desperate and brilliant and completely transparent about both?" Evander's voice carried an odd note, something almost defensive. "I've run 3 background checks. Her only crime is poverty and bad luck. That you know of." "That I know of," Evander conceded. He walked to the window, walked perfectly steady, and stared out at the glittering city below. "But her instincts are genuine. You can't fake that level of strategic thinking. She could have stolen information today and sold it for 10 times what I'm paying her. And maybe she's waiting for the big score instead of the quick cash. Then she'll reveal herself eventually. They all do." Odessa forced herself to retreat before they could discover her, her mind reeling. Evander wasn't paralyzed. The wheelchair was a lie. The vulnerability was bait. And she was trapped in the middle of whatever deadly game he was playing with his own board of directors. She just reached the kitchen when the study door opened fully, and Griffin emerged, nodding curtly at her before heading to the elevator. She kept her eyes down, playing the role of the properly invisible servant. But as Griffin passed, he paused. "Good luck," he said quietly. "You're going to need it." The next morning, Odessa arrived to find a woman in the penthouse. Not Mrs. Chen, someone younger, more predatory. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Odessa's car. Her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "You must be the new acquisition," the woman said, looking Odessa up and down with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating livestock. "I'm Morgana Thorne, chief of security and Evander's cousin. Odessa Laurent." She was acutely aware of her maid's uniform, of the way Morgana's eyes catalogued every detail. "Yes, I've read your file. Business degree, impressive GPA, completely unemployable." Morgana's tone was pleasantly poisonous. "Tell me, what does a woman with your education think she'll gain working as domestic help? A paycheck. How refreshingly honest. And nothing else. No aspirations of seducing the vulnerable CEO. No plans to steal corporate secrets for a rival." Odessa felt her spine stiffen. "I'm here to work, Ms. Thorne. Morgana, please. We're all family here, aren't we?" She moved closer, her perfume expensive and cloying. "I handle security for this company, Miss Laurent, which means I investigate threats. And you, with your convenient desperation and convenient competence, are remarkably convenient. Is there something specific you're accusing me of?" "Not yet." Morgana's smile widened. "But Evander has a weakness for trusting people he shouldn't. His former beta, Victor, played him beautifully for months before trying to seize control. I'd hate to see history repeat itself. Then perhaps you should focus on the board members who already have access, not the maid who cleans his floors." The words came out sharper than Odessa intended. Morgana's eyes narrowed with something that looked almost like respect, or perhaps just a predator recognizing prey with teeth. "Clever," she said softly. "But cleverness in your position is often indistinguishable from manipulation. I'll be watching you, Miss Laurent. Very closely." She swept past toward Evander's office, leaving Odessa standing in the hallway with the unshakable feeling that she'd just made a powerful enemy. Through the open study door, she heard Morgana's voice, honey-sweet and poisonous, "Darling cousin, we need to discuss your new maid. I've found some concerning gaps in her financial history. I think she may be more dangerous than she appears." Odessa gripped her cleaning supplies tighter, her knuckles white. The test apparently had only just begun. The package arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by armed courier and sealed with biometric locks that required Evander's fingerprint and retinal scan to open. Odessa watched from the kitchen doorway as he accepted it. His face impassive, though she'd learned to read the subtle tension in his shoulders that meant something significant was happening. "Miss Laurent," he called without turning around. "I'll need you to refrigerate this immediately. Medical storage unit, second shelf, away from any food items." She approached cautiously, noting the pharmaceutical company logo on the insulated case. Inside, nestled in temperature-controlled foam, sat a single vial of amber liquid and a preloaded injection pen. The label read, Regenerex 7. Experimental Neural Restoration Therapy. Patient, Evander Thorne. Handle with extreme care. "This is the trial drug I've been waiting for," Evander said, and there was something in his voice. Hope, maybe, carefully buried under layers of cynicism. 12 months of applications, background checks, and legal waivers. If it works, I might regain some function in my legs. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that if Odessa hadn't seen him walking 3 nights ago, she would have believed every word. But she had seen him, which meant this was another test. The question was, a test of what? "I'll store it properly," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "The injection is scheduled for Monday. The medical team will administer it here." He finally looked at her, those amber eyes searching for something. "No one else is to touch that vial. Not Mrs. Chen, not the other staff. Only you and the doctors. Understood?" "Perfectly." She carried the case to the industrial-grade medical refrigerator he kept in the pantry, another oddity she'd catalogued but never questioned aloud, and secured it on the second shelf as instructed. The temperature display read a steady 4 degrees Celsius. Everything by the book. She was closing the refrigerator when Morgana's voice made her jump. "Such an important delivery. I hope you understand what's at stake." Morgana leaned against the kitchen counter, immaculate as always, her dark eyes glittering with something Odessa couldn't quite name. She'd been appearing more frequently over the past week, always watching, always probing with questions disguised as casual conversation. "Mr. Thorne gave me clear instructions," Odessa said carefully. "I'll follow them." "Of course you will. You're very good at following instructions, aren't you?" Morgana moved closer, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "But what if the instructions are the problem? What if that drug isn't what Evander thinks it is?" Odessa's pulse quickened. "I don't understand. My cousin has been under tremendous stress since the accident. The paranoia, the isolation, the constant fear of another attack." Morgana's expression was the perfect mask of concerned family. "His judgment isn't what it was. That drug, I've had it analyzed. The composition is questionable. Unapproved compounds. Dosages that exceed safe parameters. Then he should consult with his doctors." "His doctors are yes men who'll inject him with anything he demands because he pays their mortgages." Morgana's hand landed on Odessa's arm, gentle but firm. "I've tried to talk to him but he won't listen. He sees conspiracy in every concern, suspects betrayal in every question. What are you asking me to do?" "Nothing dramatic. Just a small accident. Contamination. Knock the vial over while cleaning, perhaps. The temperature controls in that refrigerator are notoriously sensitive. A door left open too long, and the entire batch becomes unusable." Morgana's smile was sympathetic, understanding. It would force him to wait, to slow down, to reconsider this dangerous treatment. You'd be protecting him from his own desperation. Odessa felt ice settle in her stomach. This was it, the real test. Morgana was handing her a perfect excuse to sabotage Evander's property, to prove her disloyalty, to confirm every suspicion. And if the drug was fake anyway, if the wheelchair was a performance, then destroying it should mean nothing. Except it meant everything. No, Odessa said quietly. Morgana's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her eyes. No. Mr. Thorne gave me explicit instructions. I'm not qualified to make medical decisions for him, and neither are you, Ms. Thorne. If you're concerned about his safety, file a formal objection with his medical team. But I won't sabotage his property, even if it saves his life. Even then, that's not my decision to make. The silence stretched between them like a garrote. Then Morgana stepped back, her professional mask sliding perfectly into place. How admirably principled. I can see why Evander finds you refreshing. She moved toward the door, then paused. But principles are expensive luxuries, Miss Laurent. I hope yours don't cost you everything you've worked for. After she left, Odessa leaned against the counter, her hands trembling. She'd passed the test, she was almost certain of it, but the victory felt hollow. Because now Morgana knew she couldn't be manipulated, which made her either an ally or an obstacle. And Odessa had no illusions about which category she'd just been sorted into. The weekend passed in tense normalcy. Evander was absorbed in work, barely acknowledging her except to dictate emails or request coffee. The drug remained untouched in its refrigerator, and Morgana didn't return. By Monday morning, Odessa was wound so tight she felt like a wire about to snap. She was dusting Evander's bedroom, a space she rarely entered, all sharp masculine lines and expensive minimalism, when she heard raised voices from the study. Not Morgana this time. Griffin. Got confirmation from the forensics team. The access codes Victor used to breach your private accounts. They were generated from a terminal inside this building. Someone on your executive board gave them to him. Which one? Evander's voice was deadly calm. The digital signature was corrupted. Could be Bradford, Martinez, or Chen. All three had access during the relevant time frame. So we're back where we started. No, we're further ahead. We know Victor didn't work alone. We know the conspiracy goes higher than we thought. But Evander, you can't keep living like this. The wheelchair, the isolation, the constant suspicion. It's eating you alive. It's keeping me alive, Evander corrected. The moment I reveal I'm not actually paralyzed, the traitor goes to ground and we lose our only advantage. And what about her? The maid. Are you going to keep testing her until she breaks? She hasn't broken yet. That doesn't make it fair. Fairness is for people who aren't fighting for survival, Griffin. Odessa backed away from the door, her heart hammering. So Victor's betrayal had been part of a larger conspiracy, one that might still be active. Evander's paranoia wasn't madness, it was justified. And she was caught in the crossfire of a war she barely understood. That night, Evander didn't emerge from his study for dinner. When Odessa brought him soup, Mrs. Chen's recipe, supposedly good for stress, she found him slumped over his desk, his skin flushed, his breathing shallow. Mr. Thorne. She set the bowl down, alarmed. Are you all right? Fine, he muttered, but his voice was rough, strained. Just tired. She touched his forehead before thinking better of it, and nearly jerked back from the heat. You're burning up. You have a fever. I don't get sick. Well, you're sick now. She grabbed her phone. I'm calling your doctor. No. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength for someone who looked half dead. No doctors. No one else comes into this penthouse. Do you understand? You need medical attention. I need discretion. His amber eyes, fever-bright and desperate, locked onto hers. Someone tried to poison my coffee last week. The lab results came back yesterday. Slow-acting, subtle, meant to look like natural illness progression. If I bring in doctors now, whoever did it will know I'm onto them. Odessa's blood ran cold. Then what do you want me to do? Help me to bed. Basic care, fluids, fever reducers, monitoring. Can you do that? She should have refused. Should have called Griffin or Morgana or anyone with actual medical training. But the vulnerability in his face, the trust implicit in his request, made refusal impossible. "I can do that," she said quietly. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of cold compresses, medication schedules, and watching Evander's fever spike and break in terrifying cycles. She'd moved a chair into his bedroom, dozed in fitful intervals, and learned more about the man behind the ruthless CEO mask than any amount of observation could have taught her. He was a restless patient, fighting unconsciousness even when his body desperately needed rest. He muttered in his fevered sleep, fragments of business deals, warnings about Victor, and once, heartbreakingly, a child's voice calling for someone named Elena who never answered. During his brief lucid periods, he was surprisingly civil, almost human. "You should go," he said on the second night, his voice hoarse. "This isn't in your job description." "Neither was organizing your files or taking dictation," Odessa replied, wringing out another cold cloth. "Consider it scope creep. I'm paying you to clean, not to." He broke off, grimacing as another wave of fever hit. "Not to see me like this." "Like what?" "Sick. Human." She pressed the cloth to his forehead, ignoring his weak attempt to push her away. "Everyone gets the flu, Mr. Thorne. Even terrifying billionaire alphas." "I'm not." He stopped, seeming to realize the absurdity of the denial. "You think I'm terrifying?" "Absolutely. But you're still here." "Yes. Why?" It was a genuine question, asked without the usual layers of suspicion and calculation. In the dim light of the bedroom, with his defenses stripped by fever, Evander looked younger than his 32 years. Vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with wheelchairs or corporate conspiracies. "Because someone needs to be," Odessa said simply. "And because, despite everything, I don't think you're actually a monster. Just someone who's been hurt enough times to become one." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor she hadn't known was there. "You don't know what I've done. What I'm capable of." "You're right. You don't. But I know you could have fired me a dozen times over and haven't. I know you pay me more than market rate because you're aware I'm desperate. I know you test me constantly because you're terrified of being betrayed again, not because you're cruel." She met his feverish gaze steadily. "So no, Mr. Thorne, I don't think you're a monster. I think you're afraid." The silence that followed felt weighted, significant. "Evander," he said quietly. "What? When I'm dying of fever and you're keeping me alive, you can call me Evander." By the third morning the fever had broken. Odessa woke from a brief doze to find him watching her. His eyes clear for the first time in days. His color closer to normal. "You stayed," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her chest tighten. "Where else would I go?" "Your quarters. Your family. Anywhere that didn't involve nursing a man you barely know through what might have been a biological attack." "Was it an attack?" "I don't know. The symptoms match the poisoning profile, but they also match a particularly aggressive flu strain." He pushed himself up against the headboard with visible effort. "Either way, you shouldn't have been exposed to it." "Too late now." "Yes." He was still watching her with that unsettling intensity, as if trying to solve an equation that didn't balance. "Why did you refuse Morgana's suggestion about the drug?" So he knew. Course he knew. "Because it wasn't my place to make that decision for you. Even though you think the wheelchair is a performance." Odessa's breath caught. "I never said. You didn't have to. You're too observant not to have noticed the inconsistencies. The object's placed too high. The way I never struggle with transfers. You've known for at least a week, haven't you?" There was no point in lying. "Yes. And you said nothing. Your medical condition, real or fabricated, is none of my business, Mr. Thorne." "Evander," he corrected absently. "And it became your business the moment Morgana tried to recruit you into sabotaging it." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers for a moment before settling on the blanket between them. "You passed a test I never should have set." 'Cause you're right, I am afraid. Afraid of betrayal, afraid of trusting the wrong person again. Afraid that my judgment is so compromised by paranoia that I can't tell ally from enemy anymore. That's not an excuse for testing people you claim to trust. No, he agreed. It's not. His hand moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. I'm going to tell you something true, Odessa, and I need you to understand how rare that is for me. You're the first person in 5 years who's cared whether I lived or died without calculating what my death would cost them. And that terrifies me more than any corporate conspiracy. Why? Because it means I'm starting to trust you. And the last person I trusted tried to destroy everything I built. His fingers brushed hers, tentative, testing. Because when I look at you, my instincts say mate. My alpha recognizes you in a way I've never experienced. And I don't know if that's real or if it's just isolation and desperation making me see what I want to see. Odessa's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. What do you want to see? Someone who stays. His hand closed over hers, warm and solid. Someone who doesn't flinch when I show weakness. Someone who organizes my files and argues about my emails and sits by my bed for 3 days because I'm too paranoid to call a doctor. His voice dropped lower. Someone real, in a life full of carefully constructed lies. She should pull away. Should remind him she was his employee, that this was inappropriate, that his fever might still be affecting his judgment. But his hand in hers felt like the first honest thing that had happened since she'd walked into his penthouse 3 weeks ago. I'm staying, she said quietly. At least until the end of my contract. After that. We'll see. After that, Evander echoed, and the smile that crossed his face was almost genuine. I'll have to prove I'm worth more than a paycheck. Yes, Odessa agreed. You will. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a promise and a threat and a beginning all at once. Then I'd better start practicing trust. But even as warmth bloomed in her chest, Odessa couldn't shake the cold certainty that Morgana was watching, calculating, and preparing her next move. The game apparently was far from over. 2 weeks after Evander's fever broke, he asked Odessa to marry him. Not in the traditional sense. There was no ring, no romantic declaration, no bending of his supposedly paralyzed knee. Instead, he called her into his study late one evening and laid out a business proposal with the same clinical precision he used for corporate acquisitions. I want you to be my wife, he said, as if discussing a merger. Not immediately. We'll need time to establish the relationship publicly, to ensure the transition appears organic rather than opportunistic. 6 months, perhaps. Long enough for the story to seem credible. Odessa stood frozen by his desk, the folder of correspondence she'd been delivering suddenly heavy in her hands. I don't understand. You're my mate. I confirmed it with the pack physician. The blood work I took while you slept after nursing me. He said it matter-of-factly, as if testing her DNA without permission was perfectly reasonable. The biological markers are undeniable. And beyond biology, you've proven your loyalty repeatedly. You're intelligent, discreet, and you understand the business in ways my previous companions never did. Your previous companions weren't maids you'd known for 5 weeks. No, they were socialites and executives who wanted my name or my money or my influence. You're the first person who seems content with just me. He paused, and something softer entered his voice. I'm asking you to consider it, Odessa. A real partnership. I'll clear your family's debts, establish a trust for your sister's education, provide whatever security you need. In exchange, you'll stand beside me as we root out the remaining traitors and rebuild what they tried to destroy. It should have sounded romantic. Instead, it sounded like another test. Can I think about it? She asked carefully. Of course. Take whatever time you need. But his eyes, those calculating amber eyes, were already analyzing her hesitation, cataloging it as data. She left the study feeling like she'd just been handed a gift wrapped in barbed wire. The next morning, Morgana arrived before dawn. Odessa was preparing coffee when she heard the elevator, saw the security chief's silhouette emerge into the pre-dawn gloom of the penthouse. Morgana moved with predatory purpose, carrying a slim leather portfolio that seemed to pulse with malice. "He's still asleep," Odessa said quietly. "If you need, I need you to stay out of this." Morgana's voice was cold enough to frost the windows. She moved past Odessa toward the study, then paused. "Actually, no. You should hear this too. It concerns you directly." Evander emerged from his bedroom minutes later, already dressed despite the early hour, his wheelchair silent on the marble floors. He took one look at Morgana's expression, and his own face hardened into that familiar mask of controlled aggression. "Show me," he said simply. Morgana spread documents across his desk like playing cards in a deadly game. Bank statements, transaction records, photographs of Odessa at an ATM, at a wire transfer office, meeting with a man whose face was obscured but whose posture screamed criminal. "Offshore accounts," Morgana said, her finger tracing the highlighted numbers. "Payments totaling $300,000 over the past 18 months. All routed through shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. All connected to your new fiancé." Odessa's blood turned to ice. "Those are loan payments. To a known loan shark with connections to 3 of your rival corporations," Morgana continued, ignoring her. "The timing is fascinating, Evander. Each payment corresponds with a major business decision. The Meridian merger payment, the Tokyo expansion payment, your decision to implement the new security protocols payment. That's not, I'm paying off my mother's medical debt." "Medical debt doesn't go through offshore accounts," Evander said quietly, and the gentleness in his voice was somehow worse than anger. "Medical debt doesn't require meetings with known criminals in parking garages at 2 in the morning. He's the only one who would loan to us. My mother needed treatment, and every legitimate bank rejected our applications because of my credit. Or because you were already being paid to spy on whoever employed you." Morgana's smile was venomous victory. "Face it, Evander. She played you perfectly. The desperate innocent, the brilliant mind trapped in poverty, the loyal servant who just happened to organize your sensitive files and observe your routines and gain your trust right when you were most vulnerable. Get out," Odessa said, her voice shaking. "Get out of this penthouse right now, you manipulative Miss Laurent." Evander's voice cut through her rage like a blade. "Leave us. I'll speak with you later. Evander, please, if you'd just listen. Leave us." She fled to her quarters, her heart hammering, her mind racing through the past weeks trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The loan payments were real, shameful and desperate, but real. She'd borrowed from Marcus Chen because no one else would help, because watching her mother die slowly was worse than any amount of interest payments. But she'd never spied, never betrayed, never done anything except try to survive. An hour later, Mrs. Chen knocked on her door. "Mr. Thorne requests your presence in the boardroom." Immediately. The boardroom was on the penthouse's east side, a space Odessa had cleaned but never occupied. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a massive table dominated the center, and the air conditioning was turned so high she could see her breath. A man stood at the windows, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with the coiled violence of someone who'd seen combat. Griffin, she realized. Evander's friend. Except his posture was wrong. Too dominant. Too aggressive. "Miss Laurent," he said, turning, and his voice was familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. "Thank you for coming. Where's Evander?" "Dealing with family business. He asked me to have a conversation with you in his absence." Griffin moved closer, and the scent of him, expensive cologne and alpha pheromones, was overwhelming. "A conversation about your future. I don't understand. Evander's cousin showed him some concerning evidence about your financial activities. He's conflicted, as you might imagine. On one hand, his instincts say you're his mate. On the other hand, the evidence suggests you're a very accomplished liar." He circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. I, however, see an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? You're beautiful, intelligent, and clearly skilled at reading powerful men. Evander, in his current state, can offer you respectability and money. But he's damaged goods, Miss Lauren. A crippled alpha who'll spend the rest of his life in that wheelchair, paranoid and isolated. Is that really the future you want? Odessa's stomach churned. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you have options. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, tossed it onto the table. $2 million, wired to an account of your choosing. In exchange, you walk away from Evander, sign an ironclad NDA, and come work for me instead. As my personal assistant, my companion, my mistress if you're amenable. You're offering to buy me. I'm offering to pay you what you're worth, instead of the scraps Evander throws you out of pity. He leaned against the table, his dominant alpha presence filling the room. Think about it. 2 million solves all your problems. Your mother gets treatment. Your sister gets her education. You get your dignity back instead of playing nursemaid to a broken man who'll never fully trust you. And if I refuse, then you stay with Evander, always wondering if he believes you're a spy, always knowing he tested you, always aware that his paranoia will eventually destroy whatever feelings he claims to have. Griffin's smile was cruel. Face it, Odessa. He'll never choose you over his company. He'll never trust you over his security. You'll spend your life proving your loyalty to a man who's incapable of believing in it. The words landed like physical blows because they contained fragments of truth she'd been avoiding. Evander had tested her. Would probably keep testing her. His paranoia was justified but corrosive, and she was already exhausted from trying to prove herself worthy of basic trust. But even as doubt crept in, something else rose up, a fierce, furious certainty. No, she said quietly. No. I'm not interested in your offer, Mr. Griffin. And you can tell whoever sent you here that I'm not for sale. $2 million is nothing compared to what you're asking me to betray. Odessa stepped closer, her fear transforming into anger. You think Evander is broken. You think being in a wheelchair makes him less worthy of love. You're more damaged than he is if you believe that. He'll never give you what you want. What I want is a man who treats me like an equal, not a possession. What I want is someone who's brilliant and terrifying and human enough to be afraid. What I want is Evander, exactly as he is. Wheelchair paranoia, trust issues and all. Her voice rose. Because unlike you, I don't measure a man's worth by his physical power. I measure it by his character. And Evander, for all his flaws, has shown me more respect in 5 weeks than any undamaged alpha has shown me in my entire life. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. She grabbed the envelope and threw it back at him. Tell your employer that I'm staying. Tell him I love him, not his money. Tell him that if he wants me gone, he'll have to fire me himself instead of sending intermediaries to do his dirty work. And what makes you think, Griffin's voice said, except it was changing now, deepening, becoming achingly familiar, that I'm an intermediary? Odessa's world tilted. The man before her straightened, and she saw it. The contacts changing his eye color, the subtle makeup altering his features, the posture shift from Griffin's military bearing to Evander's corporate precision. The wig came off, revealing platinum blonde hair. The voice modulator hidden in his collar was switched off. Hello, Odessa, Evander said, fully himself now, standing on his own 2 legs in the middle of the boardroom. You passed. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. I'm sorry. I needed to know. You needed to know. Her voice was barely a whisper. You pretended to be someone else. You offered to buy me like property. You made me defend you to your own face as if I didn't trust you, he finished quietly. Which is exactly what Morgana said. That my paranoia would destroy us. And she was right. Get away from me. Odessa, please. Get away from me. The scream tore from her throat, raw and agonized. You stood there and offered me money to abandon you while pretending to be your friend. You tested me like I was another corporate acquisition instead of a human being with feelings. You made me prove my love while giving me none in return. I gave you everything. You gave me suspicion and surveillance and constant tests dressed up as trust. Tears streamed down her face, hot and bitter. I stayed by your bed for 3 days. I refused to sabotage your property. I defended you against your own cousin. What more do you need? How many times do I have to prove I'm not going to betray you? I just needed to be certain. Well, now you can be certain of this. I quit. She pulled the key card from her pocket and threw it at his feet. Find another maid to play spy games with, Mr. Thorne. I'm done being your test subject. Odessa, wait. But she was already gone, running through the penthouse, grabbing her few belongings from her quarters, and slamming the elevator button with shaking hands. Behind her, she heard the wheelchair engage. Back to the performance, back to the lie. The doors closed on Evander's face, still standing on his own 2 feet, realization and regret finally cracking through his carefully constructed mask. Too late, Odessa thought as the elevator descended. Everything was too late. She'd passed his test. But he'd failed hers. Odessa spent the night in a hotel she couldn't afford, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the past 6 weeks. By morning, she'd written her formal resignation, professional, concise, and utterly devoid of the rage still burning in her chest. She returned to the penthouse at dawn, hoping to leave the letter and collect her final paycheck without seeing him. But Evander was waiting in the foyer, still in his wheelchair. His face haggard in a way that suggested he hadn't slept either. Odessa, please. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. She placed the envelope on the marble console table. My resignation is effective immediately. You can mail my final payment to the address on file. I made a mistake. You made a choice. She kept her voice steady, professional, as if her heart wasn't fracturing with every word. You chose to test me instead of trust me. You chose to treat me like a potential threat instead of a partner. You chose paranoia over love. I was afraid. We were both afraid. The composure cracked. I was terrified every single day that you'd find some reason to fire me, that I'd fail whatever invisible test you'd set, that my family would lose everything because I wasn't good enough. But I never lied to you. I never manipulated you. I never pretended to be someone else to trick you into revealing your true feelings. You're right. His voice was hollow. You're absolutely right. I let my fear turn me into the kind of man who destroys the things he cares about. But Odessa, please, I love you. That's not a test or a lie. It's the one true thing in my life. Love without trust is just control with better marketing, Evander. She picked up her bag. I hope you find whoever betrayed you. I hope you build a life where you don't have to live in fear. But I can't be part of it. Not like this. She was halfway to the elevator when Morgana emerged from the private corridor, immaculate as always, carrying a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Leaving so soon. Morgana's smile was sharp. I thought you'd at least stay for your severance package. I don't want anything from this family. Nevertheless, Evander insisted. She held out the package. Consider it compensation for your discretion regarding certain family matters. The wheelchair, for instance. Odessa's instincts screamed danger, but she took the package anyway. It was heavier than expected, and something inside shifted with a liquid sound. What is this? Documents, a data drive, and a personal item Evander wanted you to have. He's too proud to deliver it himself. Morgana leaned closer, her perfume cloying. There's also contact information for a friend of mine at Hexagon Industries. They're looking for someone with your skills. Better pay, better hours, and no psychological warfare. Just deliver that package to the address inside, and the job is yours. Every word felt like a trap closing. Why would you help me? Because despite what you think, I actually care about my cousin. And you're right. His paranoia is destroying him. The sooner you're gone, the sooner he can move on. Morgana's expression was almost sympathetic. Take the package, Odessa. Start over somewhere you're actually wanted. Odessa clutched the package and walked toward the elevator, but something made her pause. Some analytical instinct that had served her through 4 years of business school and 6 weeks of surviving Evander's tests. She looked down at the package, then at Morgana's perfectly composed face, then at Evander's devastated expression. And suddenly, horrifyingly, the pieces clicked into place. "This isn't a severance package," she said quietly. "It's a frame." Morgana's smile didn't waver. "I have no idea what you're talking about. You're setting me up. Whatever's in here, corporate secrets, stolen data, something incriminating. You're making sure I walk out of this building carrying evidence that I'm the spy you've been claiming I am all along. That's quite an accusation from someone whose offshore payments suggest otherwise." "My loan payments." Odessa moved back toward them, her mind racing. "Which you knew about because you did the background check when Evander hired me. You've been planning this since the beginning, haven't you? Waiting for him to care about someone so you could destroy them and prove his judgment is flawed." "Odessa," Evander started. "No." She ripped open the package, her hand shaking. Inside, a data drive labeled with Hexagon's logo, a packet of access codes to Evander's private servers, and a vial of clear liquid. The same vial that had supposedly contained experimental treatment. "This is your poison. The one that almost killed him." Morgana's mask finally slipped. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you've been manipulating him since the accident that wasn't an accident. I know you helped Victor because you wanted Evander's position for yourself. And when that failed, you've been systematically destroying every connection he makes, every person he trusts, so he stays isolated and dependent on you." Odessa held up the vial. "This is your insurance policy. If he ever finds proof you're the traitor, you'll claim I poisoned him. That I've been working with Hexagon all along. My desperate background, my convenient competence. It all makes a perfect story." "She's insane," Morgana said to Evander, but her voice was too sharp, too defensive. "She's trying to deflect blame. You're the one who suggested I contaminate his medication," Odessa continued, her voice gaining strength. "You're the one who showed him manipulated evidence about my finances. You're the one who's been whispering paranoia into his ear since the day I arrived, because you recognized what I was before he did. And what's that? Someone who actually loves him." The words hung in the air like a blade. Morgana's perfectly composed expression cracked, and what emerged was pure, venomous rage. "He doesn't deserve love. He deserves exactly what he's gotten. Isolation and fear and the knowledge that everyone around him is just waiting for him to fall." Her voice rose to a shriek. "I built this company with him. I protected him, advised him, stood by him through every crisis, and he still chose that pathetic beta Victor over me for partnership. So yes, I helped Victor because Evander needed to learn that trust is weakness. And when you stumbled in with your doe eyes and your desperate loyalty, proving him right, proving he could trust again. You couldn't let that happen," Evander finished, and his voice was deadly calm. "Because if I learned to trust, I wouldn't need you anymore. You'll always need me. I'm family. Family doesn't poison. Family doesn't frame innocent women. Family doesn't orchestrate corporate espionage and attempted murder out of jealousy." He moved his hands to the wheelchair's armrests, and Odessa saw Morgana's eyes widen in realization. "Evander, don't." But he was already standing, rising from the wheelchair with the fluid power of an alpha who'd never been injured. His full height towering over his cousin. Family definitely doesn't help a traitor nearly destroy the company because they're bitter about a promotion they never earned. Morgana stumbled backward, her shock palpable. "You've been faking it this whole time. Since the day Victor died in that car accident that wasn't an accident. Since the day I realized someone had tampered with his brakes to silence him before he could reveal his accomplice." Evander stepped forward, and even Odessa felt the weight of his alpha presence. "I've been waiting for you to reveal yourself, cousin. And you finally have. Security poured from the elevator. Real security, not Morgana's hand-picked team. Griffin was with them, his expression grim. "The full confession is recorded," Griffin said, holding up a phone. "More than enough for the prosecutors." As they took Morgana away, her screaming threats and justifications echoing through the marble foyer, Evander turned to Odessa. He didn't approach, didn't touch, just stood there in the ruins of his deception, looking more vulnerable than he ever had in the wheelchair. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "You were right about everything. Paranoia. Test. The way I treated you. I let fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. But I'm asking for a chance to earn it. Not as your employer. As a man who's finally learned that the only test that matters is whether I'm brave enough to trust without proof." Odessa looked at him. This brilliant, damaged, terrifying man who'd tested her in every way possible except the one that mattered. And she realized that her love for him hadn't died. It had just been waiting for him to be worthy of it. 3 months, she said quietly. What? Give me 3 months away from this penthouse, this city, this life. 3 months to remember who I am without your tests and games. And use that time to prove you can be the man who trusts instead of the man who fears. And then we'll see if you've learned anything. 3 months later, Odessa returned to find the penthouse transformed. Not physically, it was still the same sleek, sterile space, but energetically. Evander was walking now, openly, the wheelchair gone. He'd restructured the company's security, promoted based on merit rather than paranoia, and by all accounts was slowly learning to function without constant suspicion. He'd also hired her back, not as a maid but as a strategic consultant with a salary that reflected her actual worth. They worked together for weeks before he asked to see her in the boardroom, the same room where he'd pretended to be Griffin, where he'd tested her loyalty with cruelty disguised as necessity. I know what you're thinking, he said as she entered. That choosing this room is manipulative. That I'm trying to rewrite the memory. Are you? No. I'm acknowledging it. He stood at the windows where he'd stood in disguise, but this time his posture was open, honest. I destroyed something precious in this room because I was too afraid to protect it properly. And I want you to know that I've spent every day since learning to do better. Show me. He pulled a folder from the table. Not a contract, not a business proposal. A journal filled with his handwriting. Every day for 3 months, I've written about the lessons you taught me. About trust being a choice, not a test. About love requiring vulnerability, not verification. About the difference between protecting yourself and destroying the things you're trying to protect. Odessa took the journal, her eyes blurring as she read his careful analysis of every mistake, every moment of paranoia, every test that had damaged what they could have built. I'm still learning, he admitted. Some days I fail. Some days the old instincts surface and I want to verify and test and prove. But then I remember that the woman I love already proved everything that matters. And the only one who still needs to pass a test is me. And what test is that? Whether I'm brave enough to ask you to marry me without hedging, without escape clauses, without treating it like a business transaction. He dropped to one knee, the traditional gesture he'd avoided before, the vulnerability he'd hidden behind clinical proposals. Odessa Lauren, will you take a chance on a man who's finally learned that the greatest risk isn't trusting the wrong person, it's failing to trust the right one? She looked down at him, this alpha who'd chosen humility over pride, vulnerability over control. And she realized that the man kneeling before her had passed the only test that ever mattered. He'd chosen to change. Yes, she said, pulling him up to stand beside her as equals. On one condition. Anything. No more tests. No more games. Just honest, terrifying, imperfect trust. Deal, he whispered, and kissed her with the desperate relief of a man who'd finally stopped running from the thing he wanted most. Outside the windows, the city glittered with possibility. And for the first time since Odessa had walked into this penthouse, the future felt less like a test to pass and more like a life to build. Together. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?